I used to think heartbreak sounded like glass shattering, sudden, final. But that night, it came as a whisper through a thin apartment door. That afternoon, I was twirling in a pool of white at Magnolia Bridal on Main Street, the Texas sun pouring through the windows like melted gold. The lace bodice hugged my ribs. The train spilled around me like a cloud that had come down to rest at my feet. Mom stood behind me with one hand on my shoulder, eyes shining the way they used to when I brought home hand-painted Mother's Day cards. "Emily," she whispered, "you look exactly like the little girl who used to put pillowcases on her head and marry her teddy bear." Everyone in town said tomorrow would be the wedding of the year, the retired judge's daughter marrying the most promising young businessman in Hillford. Daniel shook my father's hand with a politician's smile, brought my mother lilies every Sunday, and sat in the front pew with us like he'd always belonged there. For 3 years, he was steady and dazzling at once, the kind of man people called a good bet. And yet, beneath the sparkle of beaded tulle and compliments, a thin ribbon of dread tugged at me. Maybe it was the way Daniel never said, "I love you" first. Maybe it was the private jokes he kept with his phone turned face down, or the way my family's last name slipped too easily into conversation at dinner. Cold feet happen to every bride, I told my reflection, smoothing a palm over my waist as if I could iron suspicion flat. By evening, the dress hung in my childhood closet, a white promise waiting by the door. I told myself tomorrow would be the happiest day of my life, and then I went to Daniel's place and heard the truth that would burn it all to the ground. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps me bring more true justice stories like this. Hillford, Texas, was the kind of place where reputations mattered more than weather forecasts. My father, Judge Carter, had retired years ago, but people still lowered their voices when he walked into a room. My mother ran every church fundraiser and charity gala. Her smile splashed across the local paper more often than the mayor's. In Hillford, the Carter name meant stability, respectability, legacy. And then there was me, Emily Carter, second-grade teacher, dutiful daughter, and soon-to-be bride. Daniel Reed had entered my life 3 years earlier, all charm and ambition. Everyone adored him. He brought my mother lilies every Sunday, laughed at my uncle's tired jokes, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed bigger things were waiting. To my parents, he was perfect. To me, he was everything I thought I should want. But even in those happy years, cracks showed. He never said, "I love you" first, always after me, like an echo. His phone was always face down, buzzing quietly during dinner. He asked my father about property values, connections at City Hall, even hinted about what kind of future the Carters envisioned for me. And when he complimented me, it was never about passion. It was about safety. "You're dependable, Em. Solid. Exactly the kind of woman a man can build a life with." Dependable, solid, safe. I told myself those were good things. I told myself every bride has doubts. I smiled for the cameras, rehearsed my vows, and swallowed the unease building like a storm cloud in my chest. Because in Hillford, love was supposed to look perfect. And everyone was watching. The night before my wedding, Hillford was already buzzing like a hive. Cars lined the square as out-of-town relatives checked into the inn. My mother was in the kitchen, triple-checking the catering list, while my father polished the cufflinks he'd worn on his own wedding day. I should have been tucked in bed, resting for the most important day of my life. Instead, I found myself pacing the length of my childhood bedroom, staring at the ivory gown hanging in the closet like a silent judge. Daniel had called earlier, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Tomorrow, Em. Just think, by this time tomorrow night, we'll be husband and wife." His words should have calmed me, but something gnawed at me, sharp and unrelenting. I told myself it was nerves, the same nerves every bride gets. But when I couldn't shake the unease, I grabbed my coat. "Just going for a quick walk," I told my mother. She looked up from the checklist, distracted, and nodded. The streets of Hillford were hushed, the air heavy with honeysuckle, and the faint twang of country music from a distant bar. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked toward Daniel's apartment. I wasn't sure what I wanted: to surprise him, to soak in one more private moment before the chaos of tomorrow. Or maybe I just needed to see him to silence the doubt in my chest. His building was dark except for the warm glow spilling from his window. I climbed the steps quietly, lifted my hand to knock. That's when I heard his voice. "Mom, stop worrying," he said, his tone calm, almost amused. "Everything is under control." I froze. My knuckles hovered inches from the door. His mother's voice followed, trembling with unease. "Daniel, are you absolutely sure about Emily? Marriage is a lifetime commitment. Do you truly love her?" My heart raced, waiting for his answer. Surely he'd laugh and say yes, that he adored me, that I was his world. Instead, he chuckled, a low, careless sound I had never heard from him before. "Love, Mom? That's for fairy tales. This marriage is about stability. Emily's a sweet girl, dependable, and you've seen what her family brings. Her father's name, the condo, the money, the connections. That's real security. That's what matters." The words slammed into me, knocking the air from my lungs. I pressed my palm to the wooden door to steady myself, as if the world might tilt without warning. His father's voice joined in, steady and approving. "She'll make a fine wife. Respectable, from the right family. You're making the smart choice, son." I bit down on my lip to keep from crying out. Smart choice? Was that all I was? A calculation on a balance sheet? And then came the knife that cut deeper than all the rest. "Besides," Daniel added lightly, "Vanessa's back in town. Remember her? With her, I'll always have passion. With Emily, I'll have stability. Best of both worlds." The name exploded in my mind. Vanessa. I remembered her vaguely, older than us. Dark hair, the kind of girl who could silence a room just by walking in. She had been Daniel's high school sweetheart before leaving town years ago. And now, she was back. And still in his heart. I pressed my ear closer, even as my stomach turned. "I'm meeting her tomorrow morning," Daniel continued, his voice low, intimate. "Just to settle things before the ceremony." That was it. My knees buckled, and I staggered back from the door as though it had burned me. The hallway tilted, my heels echoing too loudly as I fled down the stairwell, tears blurring the edges of the world. 3 years, 3 years of believing in every smile, every promise, every Sunday lunch with my parents. And it all crumbled in a single overheard conversation. By the time I reached the street, my chest was heaving, my vision clouded with salt and pain. The apartment building stood behind me, glowing warm and safe like a lie, while inside the man I thought I loved planned to split his life between me and someone else. I stumbled through the quiet streets of Hillford, past the church where tomorrow's vows were meant to be spoken, past the park where Daniel had first kissed me. Every landmark of our love story turned to ash before my eyes. By the time I reached my parents' house, I was shaking. I slipped past my mother's soft voice humming in the kitchen, past the glow of my father's lamp in the study. Upstairs, the dress still hung in my closet, untouched, expectant. I shut the door to my room, leaned against it, and let the tears come. The world believed tomorrow would crown me the happiest bride in Texas. But I knew the truth. Tomorrow, if I went through with it, I would be marrying a man who had already chosen someone else. And suddenly, the life I thought was mine began to collapse, piece by fragile piece. I barely slept that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard Daniel's laugh again, low, careless, slicing through the darkness. Love is for fairy tales. By morning, I had forced myself into motion, hiding the swelling around my eyes with makeup, pressing a smile into place as I walked downstairs. The house was buzzing with energy, every corner humming with anticipation. My mother stood in the dining room arranging roses into tall silver vases, her movements brisk but graceful. "Emily," she said, catching my hand, "the Chronicle is sending a photographer tomorrow. They're running a feature on the wedding. Imagine it, your photo on the front page. Everyone will see what a Carter wedding looks like." Her pride was a weight pressing into my chest. I managed a nod, though my throat felt too tight to speak. My father appeared from the study, fiddling with his cufflinks, though he wasn't dressed for anything. "I've been practicing my speech," he said, his eyes shining. "Want to hear a preview?" Without waiting for my answer, he cleared his throat and launched into it, pacing the length of the room. He spoke of family, of legacy, of how Daniel and I would carry the Carter name into the future. He even quoted scripture about honor and commitment. I stood frozen, a polite smile fixed on my lips, while inside my stomach churned. Each word felt like a brick laid into the wall of a prison I couldn't escape. By mid-morning, a knock at the door brought Mrs. Jennings from across the street. She carried a casserole dish wrapped in foil and a wedding gift with gold paper and a bow big enough to rival the roses. "The whole town's buzzing," she said warmly, pressing the dish into my mother's arms. Then she winked at me. "We haven't had a Carter wedding in decades. If you backed out now, I think Hillford would drop dead from shock." She laughed as if it were a harmless joke, but the words struck me like a stone. My cheeks burned as I forced a small laugh in return. When she left, I carried the casserole into the kitchen and set it on the counter with shaking hands. I stared at the foil, thinking of tomorrow's feast, and felt my throat close. Upstairs, my gown waited draped across the cedar chest. Its ivory folds shimmered in the afternoon light. I reached out and brushed the fabric with my fingertips. For a moment, I saw the little girl I had once been, draping pillowcases over my head, dreaming of fairy tale weddings. But the memory soured instantly, drowned by the echo of Daniel's voice. With her, I'll always have passion. With Emily, I'll have stability. I pulled my hand back as if burned. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sarah. "Em, you sound off," she said immediately when I answered. "Don't tell me you're doubting." "It's just nerves," I lied. Her voice sharpened. "No, it's not. Cold feet is forgetting your vows or worrying about tripping on your dress. What I hear in your voice, that's different. What's going on?" I swallowed hard, unable to speak the truth. If I told her, the words would solidify into something I couldn't ignore. Instead, I whispered, "If I go through with it, I betray myself. If I walk away, I betray my family. Either way, I lose." There was a long silence. Then Sarah said, steady and fierce, "Emily, who do you have to live with every single day? Them or you?" Her words pierced me, but even as they sank in, the sound of my father's voice drifted up the stairs. He was rehearsing his speech again for my mother, his tone filled with pride. My mother's laughter followed, soft and adoring. The walls of my room seemed to close in. Evening settled over the Carter house with a golden glow, but inside me, storm clouds gathered. We sat around the dinner table, my father bowing his head for grace. His voice was steady, reverent, full of thanksgiving. My mother beamed across the table at me, her eyes glistening with joy. I pushed food around my plate, unable to taste a bite. Afterward, my father cleared his throat. "How about I run through my speech for you, sweetheart? I want to get it just right." Before I could protest, he began, his words rolling like a practiced sermon. He spoke of legacy, of sacrifice, of how proud he was that his daughter had chosen a man like Daniel. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin. I sat frozen, my smile brittle, while every syllable dug deeper. They had no idea the foundation of their pride was hollow. No idea that tomorrow's perfect wedding was built on lies. Later that night, my mother appeared at my bedroom door with a small, leather-bound Bible. She pressed it into my hands. "Your grandmother carried this when she said her vows. Tomorrow, it's yours." Her voice trembled with emotion. "Emily, you'll make this family proud." I nodded quickly, afraid if I spoke, my voice would betray me. When she left, I clutched the Bible to my chest and felt like a fraud. The weight of it didn't feel holy. It felt like chains. By midnight, the house was quiet. My parents' soft laughter drifted through the walls, the sound of two people who had built their life on trust and devotion. The contrast to what I had overheard from Daniel made bile rise in my throat. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trembling. I pictured tomorrow. The Chronicle photographer snapping shots, neighbors whispering in the pews, my father at the microphone proclaiming the honor of the Carters. And then Daniel, standing beside me, smiling his perfect smile while his heart belonged to another woman. Every version of the future looked like ruin. If I stayed, I would die slowly inside. If I left, I would kill the Carter legacy in one violent blow. Tears streamed down my temples into the pillow. For hours, I wrestled with the choice until the moonlight shifted across the floor. Finally, I rose and crossed the room to the gown. Its ivory shimmer glowed faintly in the dark. For a long moment, I stared at it. Then I whispered aloud, "You're not a wedding dress. You're a warning." The words startled me, but as soon as I spoke them, I knew they were true. The clock ticked toward morning. Tomorrow, all of Hillford would be waiting. And I still didn't know whether I would be their perfect bride or their scandal. The house was silent except for the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Each chime echoed like a countdown to my own execution. Midnight had passed. Tomorrow was already here. I sat at my desk with trembling hands, a blank sheet of paper before me. My pen hovered, hesitant, as though even ink knew the weight of the choice I was about to make. For hours, I had wrestled with myself. Should I say nothing and walk down that aisle? giving my parents the spectacle they longed for? Or should I speak the truth, tearing their dreams apart but saving my own soul? The gown hung across the room, its ivory folds gleaming in the moonlight. It seemed to whisper, "Choose carefully. Once you put me on, there's no going back." I thought of Daniel again, his chuckle, so careless, when his mother had asked if he loved me. Love is for fairy tales. That was the moment the fairy tale ended. The pen touched paper before I could stop myself. "Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I can't explain everything now, but I can't go through with this wedding. I love you both. Emily." The words were uneven, blotched with tears, but they were final. I folded the note, placed it carefully on my pillow, and stood in the doorway of my childhood room. The walls still bore faint outlines from posters I'd torn down years ago. The cedar chest at the foot of the bed still smelled of my grandmother's lavender sachets. It should have felt like safety, but tonight it was a cage. I slipped on jeans, a sweater, and the most practical shoes I owned. My travel bag, packed hastily with cash, my passport, and the small envelope I'd saved for the honeymoon, felt heavier than iron in my hand. The porch steps creaked under my weight as I stepped into the cool Texas night. The stars stretched wide overhead, indifferent to the storm in my chest. Behind me, my parents dreamed of a daughter walking down the aisle. Instead, I was walking away. The bus station smelled of diesel and burnt coffee. A handful of night travelers sat slumped in plastic chairs, their faces turned toward glowing screens. I stood at the counter, my voice shaking. "One ticket to Dallas. Please." The cashier slid the stub toward me without a second glance. "Departure, 5:15 a.m. I had 2 hours to wait, 2 hours to question everything. I sank into a corner chair, clutching my bag as if someone might rip it away. The reality pressed in on me. By sunrise, my parents would find the note. By mid-morning, guests would be arriving in pressed suits and floral dresses, waiting for a bride who would never appear. And Daniel? What would he tell them? That I had gotten cold feet? That I had betrayed him? Or would he lie, the way he always did, and paint himself the victim? My phone buzzed in my pocket. Sarah. I hesitated, then answered. "Em, where are you?" Her voice was thick with sleep, but sharpened with worry. "There's no wedding?" I whispered, my throat raw. Silence crackled through the line. "What are you talking about? Did something happen?" "Please, Sarah, just tell my parents I'm safe. Tell them I couldn't marry him. Not after what I heard." Her intake of breath was sharp. "Emily, what?" I couldn't bear to explain. The words would break me open. "I'm sorry, I have to go." I hung up before her questions could trap me. The bus lurched onto the highway just as dawn began to bruise the sky. I pressed my forehead to the window, watching the familiar fields of Hillford blur into distance. My reflection stared back, a runaway bride with no gown, no groom, and no plan. Every mile carried me farther from the life I had been raised to protect. Behind me, the guests would be whispering, the music silenced, the flowers wilting in their vases. My parents would stand before 40 people with nothing but a crumpled note. I pictured my father pacing, my mother in tears, Daniel pale and furious as rumors spread like wildfire. She ran away. She left him at the altar. She ruined everything. Shame clawed at me, but beneath it pulsed something sturdier, defiance. Better a scandal than a lie. Better to be branded a coward than to chain myself to a man who had already chosen someone else. By the time the bus rolled into Dallas, my body was numb with exhaustion. The city rose before me like a giant I had no idea how to face. Glass towers glittered in the morning sun, each one taller and colder than anything I had known in Hillford. I stepped off the bus clutching my bag, surrounded by strangers who didn't know or care that I had just detonated my old life. For the first time in years, no one was watching me. No one cared about my last name. It was terrifying. It was freeing. I found a dingy motel near the station, handed over cash with shaking hands, and collapsed onto a narrow bed. The sheets smelled faintly of bleach. The ceiling was cracked, and the room was nothing like the polished condo my parents had signed over to me as a wedding gift. But it was mine. For the first time, every choice in front of me belonged to me alone. As I lay there staring at the cracked plaster, tears spilled again, softer this time, not from despair, but from the dizzying knowledge that I had chosen truth over deception. The curtain had fallen on my carefully rehearsed life, and though the audience back in Hillford would gossip, rage, and speculate, I had already stepped off their stage. Tomorrow, I would begin again. The city of Dallas was nothing like Hillford. Back home, everyone knew my name. Here, I was invisible. A woman dragging a battered suitcase through streets that smelled of exhaust and fried food, eyes darting like a stray dog searching for shelter. The contrast was dizzying. The first nights I spent in a cheap motel near the bus station. The neon lights outside blinked red and blue across the ceiling, the hum of traffic never stopping. I lay awake on stiff sheets, clutching my bag, wondering if my parents had found my note yet. But I didn't have long to wonder. On the third day, I made the mistake of opening the news app on the motel's TV. There it was, bold across the Hillford Chronicle. Judge Carter's daughter abandons groom at the altar, town in shock. My chest tightened as I read the article. They described the guests sitting awkwardly at the reception hall, the flowers wilting on the tables, the whispers growing louder by the hour. My father was quoted as shaken but asking for privacy. Daniel was described as devastated. Not one word about the truth I'd overheard behind his door. To Hillford, I was nothing but a runaway. I turned the screen off, but the headline burned into me. Money dwindled quickly. The honeymoon fund, once a promise of sun-drenched beaches, now looked like scraps barely keeping me alive. I moved from the motel into a room above a laundromat. The landlady, in her faded bathrobe, didn't ask questions when I handed her cash. The mattress sagged, the wallpaper peeled, but it was cheaper. Every morning, I circled job ads, pen scratching across the classifieds. Receptionist needed, must have experience. Administrative assistant, references required. Words that mocked me. I walked miles across Dallas, sweating through borrowed clothes, knocking on doors only to hear, "We'll call you." They never did. At night, I returned to my tiny room, shoes blistering my feet, pride shredded. I had left a life of chandeliers and engraved invitations only to end up rationing crackers for dinner. The humiliation came in waves, sharp and unexpected. Once, at a diner, I sat in a corner booth nursing a cup of watery coffee. At the next table, 2 women scrolled on a phone, whispering. "Did you see this? That Carter girl. Ran off the morning of her wedding. Poor Daniel." I froze, the spoon slipping from my hand. They didn't glance at me, didn't recognize me in my wrinkled clothes and tired eyes, but their words cut deep. To them, I was gossip. entertainment over lunch. Another time, at a job interview, the receptionist squinted at my resume. Carter? Any relation to Judge Carter of Hillford? Blood rushed to my face. He's my father. Her eyebrows shot up. I knew instantly she had read the headline. She smiled politely, but her tone cooled as she handed my papers to the manager. I didn't get the job. No matter how far I ran, the scandal clung to me. Sarah called often, her voice a lifeline across the miles. Your mom cries every night, she admitted once, her voice thick. Your dad paces the porch, people in town. They won't let it go, Em. Some say you got cold feet. Others say you discovered something about Daniel. But no one really knows. I pressed the phone tight to my ear, silent tears slipping down my face. Tell them I'm safe, I whispered. That's all they need to know. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. In Hillford, silence wasn't protection. It was fuel. My lowest point came one rainy afternoon. I had just been rejected from yet another interview. My shoes were soaked, my hair plastered to my cheeks. I ducked into the laundromat below my room, hoping to warm up. Inside, the TV above the counter was tuned to a local news segment. A cheerful anchor smiled into the camera. And in lighter news, the story of Hillford's runaway bride continues to stir conversation across Texas. Judge Carter's daughter left her groom, Daniel Reed, at the altar last month. Some call it scandalous, others say it's romantic rebellion. Either way, it's the talk of small-town society. The clip cut to footage of my parents' house. Cameras outside, neighbors whispering into microphones. I stood rooted, water dripping from my sleeves, my humiliation broadcast to strangers folding laundry. A man beside me chuckled. Crazy what women will do these days. I wanted to disappear. That night, I curled on my bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, shame pressing down so heavy I could barely breathe. I had lost everything. My family's pride, my security, my name. And yet, in the silence of that broken room, another voice whispered inside me. What did you really lose? A lie? A life built on deception? It was faint, fragile, but it was there. Still, the road ahead was long. My bank envelope was almost empty. My future uncertain. My name stained. For now, all I had was survival and the stubborn spark that refused to die. Dallas had stripped me bare. My money was nearly gone. My name was a scandal, and every mirror showed me a woman I barely recognized. Yet in that emptiness, something unexpected began to grow. At Horizon Marketing, the probation months were grueling. I felt like an imposter, fumbling with software, second-guessing every email. But I kept showing up. One by one, the tasks that once terrified me became manageable. When my supervisor, Carol, handed me a client draft and said, "You've got an eye for clarity," I nearly cried. It was the first time in months someone had praised me without conditions. Each small success stitched a new layer of armor around me. Not the fragile lace of a wedding gown, but something sturdier. Something I had built for myself. Evenings were the hardest. I'd walk the busy streets after work, past neon signs and food trucks, the air thick with car horns and laughter. Sometimes I'd stop at the glass windows of downtown shops. In those reflections, I didn't see the Carter daughter anymore. I saw a survivor. Sarah's calls remained my tether. She told me how gossip in Hillford had shifted, how Daniel's perfect image had begun to crack. People whisper he was too eager for your father's money. Some even wonder if you knew something, she said once. The vindication stung and soothed all at once. For the first time, I felt less like the villain of Hillford's scandal, and more like the only one brave enough to face the truth. One Sunday, I forced myself to a small church on the east side of Dallas. I sat in the back, hidden among strangers. The sermon wasn't about marriage or family or duty. It was about freedom. "Sometimes God breaks the cages we've built around ourselves," the preacher said. "Sometimes he lets us fall, so we'll finally learn to stand." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. For months, I had thought my flight from Hillford was cowardice. But maybe, just maybe, it was courage. 3 months passed. Carol shook my hand one Friday afternoon. "Congratulations! You're officially part of the team." Walking home with my first real paycheck tucked into my bag, I realized I had crossed an invisible line. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to live. And then, fate tested me. I was in my tiny office cubicle one morning when the receptionist buzzed me. "There's a man here asking for you." I stepped into the hallway and froze. Daniel. He looked thinner, but still handsome, dressed in a crisp suit. He held white roses, my roses. His eyes searched mine, uncertain. "Emily," he whispered. "I had to see you." My stomach knotted, but my spine straightened. I wasn't the trembling girl outside his apartment anymore. I was stronger now, forged in humiliation and hard work. We spoke briefly in a conference room. He begged, he confessed, he swore he had changed. I listened, but inside, I was calm. When he reached across the table, I pulled back. "No, Daniel. You didn't lose me because of one mistake. You lost me because you never saw me as more than a calculation, and I deserve more than that." His face paled. He gathered the roses and left, smaller than I'd ever seen him. Later that week, I had coffee with Matthew, a colleague. He wasn't dazzling like Daniel. He didn't bring roses. He asked about my projects, laughed at my nervous jokes, and actually listened. With him, there were no performances, no masks, just honesty. As we walked back to the office, I realized something monumental. Daniel no longer had any power over me. The past had knocked on my door, and I had closed it. But Hillford wasn't done with me. Rumors still simmered. Reputations still shifted. And Daniel, humiliated but not destroyed, still had influence to wield. I knew in my gut that sooner or later, the truth would have to be dragged into the light. And when that moment came, I promised myself I would not run. This time, I would stand. A full year had passed since I fled Hillford, but its shadow never fully left me. Dallas gave me freedom, yes, but Hillford still held my parents, my roots, and the whispers that wouldn't die. When Sarah called one spring afternoon, I knew the storm wasn't over. "Daniel's gotten bold again," she said, her voice tight. "He's been telling people you'll come back, that you regret what happened. He's using your silence to polish his image." I laughed bitterly. "Of course he is." Sarah hesitated, then lowered her voice. "My mom overheard him at the country club. He bragged about how the Carter name would have secured him contracts and a seat on the Chamber of Commerce. He called losing you an unfortunate business setback." The words churned like acid. I had thought walking away was enough. But Daniel wasn't just lying to me anymore. He was rewriting the story for everyone else. That was when Sarah said the words that changed everything. "Your parents and I have been talking. We think it's time for the truth to come out. Publicly." The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. My mother was hosting her annual charity gala. an event covered by the Chronicle and attended by every prominent family in Hillford. For decades, it had been the Carters' way of showcasing generosity and influence. This year, Daniel and his new companion Vanessa were expected guests. They had been making appearances everywhere, arm in arm, as if to prove they were Hillford's golden couple. "It's the perfect stage," Sarah whispered when we planned over the phone. "He'll think he's in control. That's when we strike." On the night of the gala, the banquet hall glittered with chandeliers. Silver trays of champagne floated through the crowd. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the hem of my navy dress brushing the marble floor. Conversations hushed for a split second when people recognized me. The runaway bride returned. Then the whispers rippled through the room like wildfire. I lifted my chin. Let them whisper. Across the room, Daniel spotted me. His smile faltered, then quickly returned, polished and confident. Vanessa stood at his side, radiant in emerald silk, her arm looped possessively through his. He made his way toward me, glass in hand. "Emily," he greeted, his tone dripping with false warmth. "Back from Dallas? It's been too long." "Not long enough," I said evenly. He chuckled, as though we shared a private joke. "I always knew you'd come around. People make mistakes when they're scared." His eyes swept over the crowd, ensuring others could see his magnanimity. "But it's never too late to rewrite the ending." Before I could answer, my father approached the microphone on stage, calling the room to attention for the evening's speeches. Daniel excused himself, eager to mingle near the front, where the cameras clustered. That was his mistake. Sarah slipped to my side, phone in hand. "Ready?" she whispered. I nodded, palms slick with sweat. She stepped onto the stage after my father's introduction, her voice steady. "Before we continue, I think there's something the community deserves to hear." The room buzzed with confusion. Daniel's smile stiffened. Sarah lifted her phone, pressing play. The audio echoed through the speakers. Daniel's voice, clear as day, recorded weeks earlier at the country club. "The Carter name would have secured me contracts, a seat on the Chamber of Commerce. Losing Emily was an unfortunate business setback, but marrying Vanessa? Well, stability comes in many forms." Gasps rippled across the room. People turned, eyes darting between Daniel and me. Vanessa's face went pale. Sarah let the recording play on. Daniel's voice bragging about manipulating appearances, about how love is for fairy tales, but reputation is currency. By the time the clip ended, silence blanketed the hall. Daniel surged forward, face red. "That's taken out of context!" he shouted, his polish cracking. "I was joking, exaggerating." But the damage was done. Every guest had heard. Every whispering neighbor now had proof. My mother's hand clutched mine. My father's jaw was tight, but his eyes were steady with pride. For me, not for him. For the daughter who had chosen truth. I stepped forward, my voice calm, but carrying through the microphone. "For those wondering why I left that morning, this is why. Because I would rather face scandal than live a life built on lies. I wasn't running away. I was running toward freedom." The words settled like a gavel strike. Final, irrefutable. The crowd erupted, not with applause, but with the low, electric hum of justice. Faces turned cold toward Daniel. A few guests stepped back from him as though his shame were contagious. Vanessa yanked her arm free, fury flashing in her eyes. "You used me too, didn't you?" she hissed, loud enough for half the room to hear. Then she stormed out, her heels clicking like gunfire. Daniel stood alone, his confidence stripped bare. For once, he had no mask, no script, just silence. I didn't wait to see the rest. Sarah and I slipped outside, the night air cool against my burning cheeks. The stars over Hillford glittered faintly, distant but steady. Sarah grinned. "You did it. You didn't just survive. You won." I exhaled, the weight lifting at last. No, the truth won. And for the first time since that night outside Daniel's apartment, I felt completely free. The fallout came faster than anyone in Hillford could have imagined. 2 days after the gala, the Chronicle ran another front-page story. This time, the headline wasn't about me. It was about him. From promising entrepreneur to public disgrace, Daniel Reed exposed. The article described the recordings Sarah had played at the gala, quoted guests who had watched his mask crumble, and detailed how Vanessa stormed out in fury. It was ruthless, the kind of piece that spread like wildfire through every church group and country club in 3 counties. By the end of the week, Daniel's phone calls stopped getting returned. Business partners who once praised his vision suddenly remembered reasons to distance themselves. At the bank, when he applied for a loan, clerks whispered behind the glass, "Isn't that the man the Carters humiliated?" He left red-faced, clutching his briefcase like a shield. Vanessa, once his trophy, became his burden. At the boutiques, where she used to parade in silk and pearls, women whispered audibly, "Thought she won herself a prince. Turns out, he was a pauper in disguise." She held her head high at first, but within weeks, she stopped appearing altogether. What struck me most was the way Hillford itself turned. Where once Daniel had commanded smiles and hearty handshakes, now the town's politeness curdled into cold distance. Men he used to drink bourbon with at the country club crossed the street rather than greet him. Women who once fawned over his charm looked through him as though he were invisible. At Sunday service, his pew sat empty. No one asked why. And my parents? For the first time since my flight, they could lift their heads again. At the farmer's market, my father was stopped by a neighbor who clapped him on the back. "Your girl did the right thing, Judge Carter. Took guts to walk away." My mother told me that at church, women leaned close to whisper, "Emily was brave." Most wouldn't have had the strength. They no longer bore the shame of a runaway bride. They carried the pride of a daughter who had chosen truth. I saw Daniel one final time, months later, purely by chance. I was visiting Hillford, sipping coffee at the cafe on Main Street. He walked in, shoulders hunched, a shadow of the man who had once filled every room with swagger. Conversations stilled. People didn't rush to greet him. No one offered a seat. He ordered his coffee in silence and sat alone, staring into the cup as if it could erase the stares piercing his back. Our eyes met briefly. For the first time, there was no anger in me. No longing, not even pity, just clarity. The world had already given him what he deserved. Walking out into the Texas sun, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. Justice hadn't come with shouts or vengeance. It had come quietly, steadily, through truth revealed and lies collapsing under their own weight. Daniel and Vanessa were left with nothing but each other's bitterness. And me? I had my freedom, my dignity, my future. For the first time, the whispers in Hillford didn't sting. They belonged to the past. I had stepped out of the storm, and the world had finally stopped calling me the runaway bride. Now, they called me something else, the woman who chose herself. Back in Dallas, the city lights glittered outside my apartment window like 1,000 beacons. I stood there one evening, tea cooling in my hands, and thought about the girl who had fled Hillford a year ago, trembling, clutching a single bag, convinced she was destroying everything her parents had given her. That girl had believed she was a coward, a runaway. But standing there now, steady on my own 2 feet, I finally understood the truth. I hadn't run from responsibility. I had run from a lie. Every second of that painful night outside Daniel's apartment had been a gift in disguise. His laugh, his betrayal. It had forced me to see that my worth wasn't measured by a man's ambition or my family's reputation. My worth was mine alone, and I had nearly forgotten it. I thought about the wedding dress still hanging in my childhood closet, unworn and gathering dust. Once, it symbolized everything I thought I needed: status, stability, acceptance. Now, it was just fabric. The real gown I wore was made of choices, stitched together with trembling hands and stubborn courage. People in Hillford would always whisper about me. The bride who ran. The girl who left it all behind. Let them. Because I knew better. I wasn't a runaway. I was a woman who refused to settle for a life built on deception. A woman who chose truth, even when it shattered everything familiar. And in choosing truth, I had found something stronger than comfort, stronger than appearances. Freedom. As Matthew knocked on my door that night, holding takeout and smiling the way only he could, I felt a quiet certainty settle inside me. Whatever the future held, I would face it on my own terms. No masks, no bargains, just honesty. I turned back to the window one last time, the city humming with life below me, and whispered the lesson that had cost me everything to learn. Love without truth is nothing, but truth will set you free. If you were in Emily's shoes, would you have walked away from the wedding or gone through with it to protect your family's honor? Have you ever discovered a painful truth about someone you thought you knew? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales of love, betrayal, and resilience. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring you even more stories that remind us all, you are stronger than you think. Thank you.